Now, as we speak, it is just a few days ahead of the 20th anniversary of the tragic 9/11 events, and a few years ago, still as Attorney General in 2018 at the 17th anniversary, you formulated that tragic events changed somehow the US history. If you assess now the importance, the role of this event on the US and maybe more widely globally, how would you summarize the impact what we see since then globally regarding security or the disputes around security or terrorism?
It impacted the nation in an amazing way. I had gone to New York many times and walked under those great trade towers, and they just were stunning. They were so large and so tall, and to think that they were destroyed, in one day by an attack deliberately, part of extreme religious ideology. So it impacted the nation greatly. We reviewed, the nation reviewed its procedures in great depth. One thing America does sometimes, it's slow sometimes to prepare, but once aroused, it's capable of great action. And so we definitely improved our security systems within the United States. We definitely committed to destroying the people who destroyed and attacked us. President Bush set about to do that. The people of the country were totally united. Europe and other nations around the world were supportive in great many ways, and it was a time of great action. As we think more about it, maybe we could have foreseen and should have foreseen the dangers of a very long, prolonged involvement in Afghanistan. I supported President Bush at the time, but I do believe that there was an overreach and a lack of clarity in what the end mission would be. I think there's wide opinion in the United States, both President Trump and then President Biden, to end our involvement in Afghanistan. And there's a big dispute today. President Biden has been criticized for the ineffective procedures to extricate ourselves from Afghanistan, and loss of life and the embarrassment to our allies and to the United States around the world. And actually, and I believe we could have done a better job of securing the safety of those who supported the government in Afghanistan and supported the United States and the European allies who participated in it, including Hungary was supportive of those actions initially in Afghanistan.
Do you think it could cause a surge of terrorism or terrorist groups, this quick withdrawal and the power vacuum there and this chaotic situation which we see now?
Well, it could. Many predict that this will provide a base for the extremists, the ISIS and other radical groups to set up in Afghanistan. I think the United States has proven it has incredible powers to project its military force to the most remote corners of the world and deal devastating blows. So I do not believe that the United States can withdraw and never watch and think about what's happening. And if we see a very extreme and violent organization building in any place in the globe, and if the local country will not stop it, then the United States has the right to use force to protect itself. It does not have to wait until it has been attacked. If you have sufficient evidence to prove that an attack is brewing and maybe imminent.
Do you think then it's in a way self-defense as well?
Yes. Well, it is self-defense. And it's not only self-defense for the United States, but of Europe and other countries around the world who do not, who are perceived as being threats by the forces that are radical. So who knows which country could be deemed a target of another bin Laden in the future. So I think the United States will act on that. We're not withdrawing from the world, but I do believe that the United States will remain more realistic in the future about the long-term consequences of military actions.
The situation in Afghanistan opened a new chapter and triggered a louder debate in Europe about migration, immigration. Do you think for Europe migration is a big challenge? And then we can talk about the US as immigration is a challenge. You were among those who started to design a new immigration regulation of the US as Attorney General or before.
Well, I think immigration is a very important thing, and it should be carefully considered. And the number one thing a nation should do is to secure its borders and to decide how immigration will serve its national interest. Other than really true refugees who are facing incredible persecution, I know in Europe you've got the question of whether the EU gets to decide this question or the nation state. I'm very much of a belief that local or smaller nations should assert and defend their national interest. And I believe as we work together in a global fashion to create peace and harmony and prosperity, we have to respect the right of individual nations to establish the policies they think are most important. You just don't get to the UN or the EU is not. It's not legitimate for them to dictate to a nation its internal policies.
And for a superpower as the U.S., what are the main interests? The immigration policy of the U.S. was strict traditionally, or over the last decades. So in the 2010s, the mid-2010s, what were the main challenges in this regard? Protecting the border from the south?
Yeah. Well, first, let me say that the United States admits 1.1 million people every year to permanent legal residence in the United States. They get the green card. And then within 5 years, they can become a citizen. So we have one of the most generous policies in the world. In addition, we have around 1 million who come to the United States on temporary visas to work and are employed here. And we also have hundreds of thousands in educational schools and in other type activities. So we're a very open country. And the American people became very concerned about massive flows of illegal immigration across our southern border. And the more that came, the more that got on their cell phone and called back home, and more came. And so the numbers were increasing exponentially. It was totally unacceptable. And there was a question, will we secure our borders, or will we just give up and capitulate to illegality? And so the establishment politicians, the ones that have been in control for a very long time, talked about fixing it, but never did, and never took the steps necessary to get it done. And they proposed 3 different times, 2 serious times, major legislations that were given amnesty to as many as 11 million people who've come illegally, giving them a path to citizenship, and a stunning number of people who came illegally. They would be rewarded for their illegal activity. They were also given, and their children, free education. If they appear at a hospital with illness, they're treated in the United States. So we're very generous even to people who are illegally here. The question was, will we secure our border? And so I opposed the legislation that came up each time for one primary reason. The legislation would give amnesty, legal status, to millions almost immediately. But it would only promise to take the action to end the illegal flow at the border. And that would take a number of years and a lot of money, and we wanted to guarantee that too. So that was a big dispute. In my judgment, having watched this for many years, is that the enforcement never would have occurred. Never would have occurred. So you would have, and that amnesty and no enforcement in the future would result in exactly what happened in 1986. A much smaller group of people were given amnesty. A promise of enforcement in the future was given by the government. It never happened. The enforcement never occurred. And as a result, we ended up with 11 million people in the country illegally. It encouraged people to come. They thought they'd get amnesty too if they could just get in the United States and waited long enough. Pretty soon they would be given amnesty. So this was really a crisis in the country. The American people rose up and the politicians backed down. They could not get the votes to pass their amnesty bill because the people were alert to it, and I really led the fight on it. I was on the Senate Judiciary Committee where the bill started. I knew what the flaws in it were, the holes in the bill that would not, and we convinced a lot of members of Congress and the American people this would not work. And each time it failed, but the last time it was very close, bipartisan. Former President Bush, President Obama, they were both for the bill. So when President Trump came along, he has this unusual ability to communicate. Instead of arguing about all the details, he said, "You elect me." He said basically this: American people, you are right. We have to secure our border. A nation without a border is not a nation. You elect me president, and I'm going to build a wall, and we're going to put an end to this. Heads nodded all over America, and that was a big part. But it was after he got elected, and I was Attorney General, which had a part of the role. But Homeland Security is where the Border Patrol and our enforcement, 90% of it is. But I know how hard it was. We had courts that blocked his actions. We couldn't get Congress to close loopholes, and it was a constant battle. But after 4 years, the president had achieved remarkable progress finally, and he got this major agreement with Mexico to say that if someone were caught at our border, they didn't get to come in the United States. They would wait in Mexico if they were going to apply for refugee status or some other legal status. And the numbers started dropping. People would get on their cell phones and call back home and say the border's no longer open. And they pay $5,000 to $10,000 to smugglers who would bring them into the country, and they were paying their money and not getting in. So that was how it happened. I would say this, that judges appointed by liberal and conservative administrations, Republican and Democrat, have been finding that 85% of the people that had come illegally do not qualify as refugees. And they don't qualify as refugees. We have people come and say, I'm subject to spousal abuse. My husband beat me. Well, that's not a basis to demand that you can leave Guatemala and come to the United States and demand entry into the United States. That's not a refugee status question, and neither would it give them the right to apply to come to Hungary, for that matter. So I guess what I'm saying is most of the people don't qualify as refugees.
There are some parallels with the European situation as well, and one specific parallel is that those who are opposing this kind of tougher steps or just the effective protection of borders are blaming those who are for these policies as being often blaming or labeling as being racist or being xenophobic. Did you encounter this kind of criticism in Hungary? Yes.
Yes, we absolutely heard that. At one point in a private meeting, somebody recorded it. Secretary of State, presidential candidate Hillary Clinton said she believed in open borders. A number of Americans of prominence have said they believe in open borders. And what they've been able to, and the global economic forces, they want more cheap labor, and they want open borders, and they want to be able to bring anybody in who would undercut the wages of the people in the United States. So, and the national news media was very hostile. And I said, and it's true, that they would consider and pass anything as long as it didn't work. You propose any bill that would actually be effective against illegal immigration. And like I said, we have a generous legal system, but if you propose something that would actually stop the illegality, you could never get it passed in Congress. And so those were the things that, and so people who fought against it were labeled in unkind ways, when my view was that we'll have immigration, but it's going to be limited, and we're going to, and President Trump correctly said people should apply, and people with the best qualifications should come first. If somebody speaks Hungarian and somebody doesn't, and they both apply with the same education level, why shouldn't the person who cares enough about Hungary to learn the language be given a priority? They all don't have to speak English, but the whole point of which is a nation state has the right to try to select the limited number of people it can accept and make sure that they share the civilization and the legal history of their nation and will be good citizens. That's important.
And it is in connection with the integrity of the legal system of a country. The United States has a traditionally solid legal system designed during the many years during the history. Do you think these kind of approaches, like opening the border for all, could threaten or at least pose some risks to this kind of integral legal system, which is solid?
Absolutely. I'm a strong believer that this one of the greatest, if not the greatest strength of America is that the American people believe in law. They believe in that our legal system is no respecter of persons, but objective and treats everyone alike no matter who they are. And this whole abandonment of some 700 pages in the Immigration and Nationality Act and undermining it is a threat to other parts of the legal system. For example, the whole fundamentals of the Immigration and Nationality Act is to say we have a limited number of immigrants. These are the standards that must be applied, and everybody does not get to come to America simply because they want to. We're the most prosperous nation in the world. We have generous health care and education. We can't take the whole world. Someone estimated 1 billion people would like to come to the United States if they could. We can't accept that kind of flow of people, and a nation should only accept the number of immigrants that can be assimilated, that don't huddle in groups and speak their own language, but really become part of the melting pot, we call it, in the United States, and be good citizens of the United States. They swear their oath to be a citizen of the United States and renounce their commitments to foreign nations. That's what citizenship is all about. So I think that the legal system of the United States is threatened when we have a detailed legal system designed to have lawful immigration, and it's ineffective. It's almost sometimes you'd think you might as well burn it because there's so many loopholes in it that people get around it.
And do you think it was threatened last year? There was a huge issue after the tragic events in Minnesota, after the BLM movement had heard its voice louder, the demonstrations, which had really a huge impact on the European or Western world dispute or the debate on how solidarity and inclusion in a society should look. Do you think it has also impacts on the US legal system, what we saw since then? And it was, of course, during the presidential campaign, so it had also political aspects as well. So do you think the aftermath of last year's dispute and sometimes aggressive demonstrations had its and has its impact still?
Well, it has, and it's damaged the rule of law, and politicians started saying that, well, rioting is healthy exercise. Well, you break windows and steal products from the stores or burn automobiles and tear up police cars, even attack federal buildings and state facilities and burn them, that somehow this was some normal process of protest. But that's a riot. It's not a protest. In the United States, we honor the right to protest. We honor free speech, or at least we used to. And those things are not speech. They're unlawful actions, and we did too little to stop it. One of the problems in the United States it develops is that 85% of the police in the United States are city and state, not federal. And in the cities which have the large police departments, New York, Chicago, and so forth, those are hired and operated and paid for by the city. And many of those cities are very liberal, even radical mayors. And they were hostile to the police. and they constricted the ability of the police to carry out their functions, even though those functions had been approved constitutionally by the U.S. Supreme Court for many years. They stopped them from doing lawful actions. And as a result, we had a stunning surge in crime. Unbelievable, really. I mean, I had been part of the 1980 Ronald Reagan as a federal prosecutor fight to reduce crime. It took 30, 40 years. But the United States stayed on a policy, and for example, the death murder rate dropped by over half in 30 years, when it had been going up 10 or 15% a year for 10 years, when President Reagan became president. So we just abandoned those things that worked. And it's dramatically clear that poor people, our African American communities and our Hispanic communities, are the most victims of these crimes. It's dramatically so. Mm-hmm. Not close. And they're safe neighborhoods in all the big cities, and they have walls around their places and sometimes guards even. But they live pretty much in safety. But poor communities are not. And so I believe the United States government owes public safety to every American, whether they're poor or a minority, and we're not providing it. And oddly, where it's happening most is in the cities run by the most radical, progressive, left-wing governments.
Those on the left, they are arguing that in the U.S. There is systematic racism. But as in Alabama, you were raised in Alabama, you started your career there. Those times, maybe in the 50s, 60s, there could have been systematic racism in part of the legal system. But do you see traces nowadays in the U.S. as being systematic racism, as the blame is?
No, I do not. And what has been lost in this, as I just mentioned, is that good policing, strong police departments arrest people who commit crimes. They don't arrest people because of the color of their skin. But what we know for an absolute fact is that the most victims of the crimes are poor and African American and Hispanic communities. And the leaders of those communities want more police. And polling numbers show that the average American, minority citizen or whatever, they want police in their neighborhood. They do not want rising crimes. And let me tell you, the crime has surged. Let me tell you this story. It's factual. In the early 90s, New York City had 2,300 murders, which threatened the very viability of the city of New York. Its future was threatened by crime. And actually, Rudy Giuliani became the mayor, and they committed more money and intensive study of how to reduce crime. A few years ago, that dropped to under 300. That's what good policing does. And of that 2,300 that were murdered, it was a very high percentage would be African American communities and Hispanic.
Though we heard last year the demands at those protests defound police.
And so it's a radicalism. It's almost akin to Marxism. This is not normal liberal behavior. This is not meeting with African American leaders and working to improve safety in their neighborhoods and to avoid insensitive actions. We can always work to improve that and should work to improve that. That's what good people do. But the Black Lives Matter and Antifa groups have radical agendas. They never wanted to sit down with the police and try to figure out how to make communities safer. They just wanted to attack and defund the police. This was a nihilist agenda that actually does, I think, arise out of Marxist idea that you sort of destroy the government first and then we'll worry about replacing something later. And so great cities, Los Angeles, who had a great police department, have seen a 50%, I think, increase in homicides. Chicago has almost doubled its homicides. Baltimore has the highest homicide rate in the country, I believe. New York City had an increase in 45%, I think, in 1 year in homicides. These are increases that are stunning, and the victims are our poorer people. It's just horrible. It's immoral. It's wrong. These people are totally off base, who are defunding police and attacking law enforcement, and people are dying as a result. Now, I like what Hungary is doing. They understand that you don't want crime to start growing out of control. They understand that the laws on immigration have to be enforced, and they are standing firm on those principles. They also understand the importance of culture and family and raising children correctly so that they don't commit crimes, and teaching people to respect law enforcement officers. So I think the other view, what we're seeing so much of in the big cities in the United States, is just a disaster. And I hope and am proud that Prime Minister Orban and the government here does not seem to be in any way going that direction.
And as a last question, I would like to share with you an experience. I did an interview with Mr. Dennis Prager, and he had quite sad words he mentioned, but because he said that he always does in Eastern Europe or East Central Europe nowadays, because we here look to the West as the good practice. And he always says that maybe nowadays it is no more that good practice. Would you agree in any way with such a expression?
Well, I think there's sadly a lot of truth in it. I don't think the country is doomed. I am totally convinced that President Trump would have won re-election. I think everybody is, had there not been this COVID pandemic. And it stirred up so much, and he lost only by a razor-thin margin. It was very close. He still thinks he won. But regardless, it was very close. I think the Republicans, the conservative, traditional people, will win back majorities in both Congresses. And so I think the position of the United States that's gone so far on some of these matters is going to start reversing. Already their activities, you're familiar with Mr. George Soros here in Hungary. Well, he has funded many district attorneys, prosecutors, who are against prosecution and think we have way too many people prosecuted. And they've won. But we've seen shocking increases in crime where those people have changed policies. So we've had a test We have tried this out. They've done it in big cities all over America, and it's failed everywhere. And so I think that maybe the pendulum, I have hopes that the pendulum will swing back on that. And one more thing, to me, a nation needs to understand its values, need to protect its legal system, to respect its people, to encourage them to be patriotic, to encourage them to support their country and believe in it. And if you do that, you've got to set an example. And I think Europe right now is at perhaps I'm old enough to know that nobody knows with clarity whatever's going to happen. But in my view, Europe and the United States is at a crossroads. And are we going to continue this globalist, leftist agenda that's been gaining strength? Or will we return to more traditional, proven values that have served us for centuries, that have protected our liberties, that have protected our safety, that helped us be educated and prosperous? And I think religious faith is an important characteristic of a healthy nation. I see the Pope will be coming Sunday, and so this is a great nation of faith. Hungary is. And so those things, if we abandon those things, I'm afraid for our future. But I'm proud that it appears to me, just as a visitor from abroad, that the leadership in Hungary says we're not going that direction. We're going to affirm the best of our past, our highest and best values, and we're going to protect the integrity of our nation. And the people of Hungary get to rule and decide the vast majority of the issues that are important to them, including crime and immigration and social matters and marriage and things of that kind. Ought to be decided by the people of Hungary, not somebody in Brussels or in the UN. That's just that simple. And so I believe that that's a healthy thing. I think it should be respected. I think these elites that are trying to change the entire culture of the Western world, the greatest culture, the greatest civilization that we've had in history, want to somehow find it to be improper and immoral and illegitimate because we've prospered. I think that's a terrible mistake. And I like it that more people are standing up to it. I was at a Common Sense Foundation here a few days ago, and we're talking to some of the young people, and they were expressing some concern that not them, but other young people were leaning towards socialist ideals. And I told them that I had more confidence about them, because in Hungary, almost every young person knows somebody, their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, uncles, and all, who suffered directly under communism. They know the brutality of that kind of government. But in the United States and Canada and those places, we've never had that experience. And so young people are following the music of this idealistic left, and we've got to confront it. And I'm proud to see there are places, particularly in Central Europe, that are standing up and explicitly rejecting that and exposing it for the dangerous philosophy that it is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.